Let's get more now on Antony Blinken's latest visit to the Middle East with Mehran Kamrava, who's a professor of government at Georgetown University in Qatar. Really good to have you back with us, Professor. Antony Blinken on his 11th visit to the region since Israel's war on Gaza began. Publicly, he's made some seemingly reassuring comments. He's said that he's urged Israel that now is the time to end the war in Gaza. He also says he told Israeli leaders to allow more aid into the enclave, particularly in the besieged north. How do you think that message was received by Israeli officials, including the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu?
I'm sure it was received politely, but there's no reason to believe that it will not be ignored as it has been ignored in the past repeatedly. Let's remember that none other than the American president, Joe Biden, has repeatedly asked Israel to agree to a ceasefire, to allow humanitarian assistance. And this, as we just heard, is Blinken's 11th trip to the region. And he's been ignored in the past, and he will be ignored again by Netanyahu, who is determined to carry on the genocide in Gaza and the destruction of Lebanon. And of course, it would serve his political career and save his political career to expand the scope of the war now apparently to Iran.
Yes, and Professor, we're now looking at live pictures of Deir al-Balah. We can see plumes of smoke there. This as Israel's deadly siege of northern Gaza enters its 19th day. Antony Blinken was asked about the situation in northern Gaza as he prepared to leave Tel Aviv, and he repeated that the United States rejected any notion of Israel reoccupying Gaza, and that he'd been assured by Benjamin Netanyahu that Israel had no such plans, and that's despite pressure from many within his own party to actually reoccupy that northern part of the enclave. This has been detailed in the so-called General's Plan in Israel. Do you believe the Israeli response to those concerns?
Look, I think realistically, occupying Gaza is going to be a logistical nightmare. It's one thing to attack and destroy. It's something quite different to control people through occupation. The Americans found that out in Iraq. The Russians are finding that out in eastern Ukraine. And so let's also remember that it was another right-wing Israeli Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon, that withdrew from Gaza after realizing that the costs of occupation, particularly of a place like Gaza, are prohibitive. And so I think it's one thing for Israeli politicians to the right of the political spectrum, ideological diehards, to speak about occupation of Gaza, but it's something quite different to actually carry it out and make it operational.
Yes, I mentioned there Antony Blinken urging Israeli leaders that now was the time to end the war in Gaza, but it really does seem that the Israelis now are doubling down on their efforts there, especially in the north, where siege of that part is now ongoing now for more than 2 weeks. What do you believe is Israel's endgame then, if, as you say, the reoccupation of the north of Gaza is unrealistic or at the very least unfeasible? What are the Israelis aiming to do?
I don't think the Israeli cabinet really has a clear endgame in mind, or at least it doesn't appear so. It's been going from kind of it's been going on sheer momentum. It's sought to prolong the war as long as possible. I think it's important to remember that prior to October 7th, 2023, Netanyahu was in grave political danger. His decades-long political career was in trouble. And in many ways, Hamas sent him a lifeline by the October 7th attack. And so it serves Netanyahu and the right wing of his cabinet politically to prolong the war as long as possible, regardless of the heavy costs inflicted on the Palestinians and the genocide. And I think Netanyahu figures that the political benefits of prolonging the war outweigh the political costs of having Israeli hostages in Gaza and the pressure that the Biden administration has been putting on it quite meekly and weakly. And so I think the end game is simply to prolong the political career and to depopulate Gaza as much as possible, to wreak havoc in Lebanon infrastructurally as much as possible, to make the Lebanese civilians suffer and despise Hezbollah, to foment sectarian tensions in Lebanon as much as possible, and of course to go down in history as the longest-serving prime minister of Israel.
Okay, Professor, we will have to leave it there. But thank you so much, as always, for joining us here on TRT World.